Today I welcome you to my channel and review of Getterup Sogn, Getterup Parish, or you could say a corruption of the very old name St Gertrud Church or Parish. And we will get back to who St Gertrud is, but for the purpose of starting this conversation, we are just taking a quick look at the map and look at the overall location of this parish, which is to the southern part of Thy land, which is the closest point on the European continent to sail to Norway. There are multiple other places to cross this water, which for this purpose and this conversation today, a good combined name would probably be the European Gulf, as opposed to the Middle Sea or Mediterranean at the south, much more known like a common name for that body of water all the way from the Black Sea to the Atlantic Ocean, whereas this one comes all the way from the Loka Sea just north of St. Petersburg and carries through multiple countries and so on and so forth, all the way to the border around, you could say, Shetland Islands and the English Channel. So there are two main St. Gertruds, as I know of. One lived around year 600 and the other one lived around year 1200. And you may ask, which one is it then? It's hard to say. We don't have too much written historic material for this period about this parish. But what we can do is just take out a few indicative things. And one of the most important thing about her from the 1600s, from the 600s, is she was considered the church builder or hospital builder. And we do have a few peculiarities about this church. One of them being it had a tower before year 1800 about, which was the tallest tower in all of Syd-Thy, meaning it could be indicative of this is a community who likes to build and wants to praise this St. Gertrud. Another thing is there's a few minor peculiar things inside the church, most notably the kind of round arch at the forefront of the apsis, which it looks like an attempt. It could be an attempt to try to do a complete circle. Or, of course, it could also just be a failed construction attempt. But in that case, it's a very, very old construction attempt. That may indicate that it's the early St. Gertrud who is the saint or the patron of this church. So let's just take an overview of the church. Here you see Limfjorden in the Limfjorden in the background. And in the front you have the church, obviously, with the churchyard surrounding it. Most noticeably from this side, we have the round tower stair access at the back here on the far right side. Another interesting thing is in the far back you can see here the Sct Abbey, which was a dominant abbey in this area. Of this parish, there's a few small, tiny towns here. One is Getterup, which is located with a beach down to the Limfjorden in Limfjorden. Then we have Getterup proper, which is the central area, which includes the church. And then we have the North Getterup or Nørre Getterup, which includes a Grim farm called Grim Nørregård. And in this area, we also have the important part of the overall Revs town, which doesn't exist anymore. And furthermore, we have the Guntoft area. In particular, we have the Guntoft mill. But for whatever reason, the mill is often conscribed to Ydby area. Of course, the mill is it's a water mill, so it is part of a river. This river forms the border of the parish, so it's no problem for the miller to build on either side of that tiny river. So it seems that the name Guntoft Mill is may be just an accident. We have a multitude of maps before year 1800. We have historical maps talking about a variety of things, such as lot number maps, maps for land usage, and for a genealogist, there's a treasure trove of maps. You can find exactly where your ancestor has been working from year 1787 and backwards, where our ancestors has been exactly located in this parish. I have reviewed the lot allocations and the taxations from about year 1600 to about 1787 and put them into a large spreadsheet and try to color the farm through time with the naming and the sizing and that sort of stuff. As you know, farms change hands, and when they do that, and in between, they change size, and land are sold and leased, and so on and so forth. And in some cases, disappears in the ocean, not maybe in this parish, but other parishes. And new land has been gained from drainage and so on and so forth. So it's a complex and living testimony to these farmers to look at this matrix of the farms. So looking at the inventory of the church to find historical facts, there is not much in the sense of epiphalias, as we do not have a large estate in this parish. We don't even have one in Hellisø. As a matter of fact, the closest one, which is local, is Skibsted Gård or Sibsted, close nearby. But that had the Ydby Church as its main church. So this Getterup Church is devoid of major estate influence and common name. On the other hand, it's not disturbing anything, so we do have lots of local names pertaining to the actual builders of the chairs and the church tower and so on and so forth. And I have been in this effort been trying to establish who these names and people are, and that's located in the file I have done about this. It's called the church icon file. Further, we have the clergy is not located in this parish. The clergy for this church is located in the twin parish of Hellisø, placed to the south. Looking at the school in this area, it seems we have had a school at least from 1540. This is astonishing. The way we study this is we have a variety of sources trying to help us out, establishing who was the school master here. And the matrix is quite complex, as Hellisø and Getterup, both of them are in as part of the school establishment, and it's not clear if there was two schools or only one, but sometimes it seems that the schoolmaster, the principal, was living in one or the other, and so on and so forth. It's quite a complex matrix, and it's by no stretch finished. But you can enjoy the fact that there was a school for that long, so this means that lots of people in this parish has been literate for about 500 years for sure. I'm happy to be able to talk to you about a matter of great importance for this area of Thy and Mors, where the secrecy and the sacredness of relations are of such importance. So in this story today, we have a gentleman in 1679 who has emptied his brother-in-law's estate on behalf of his sister, which is the wife of the deceased, to hoard the money, or for purpose of asset protection, we may say today. So the crown and taxation will not confiscate all the property. So to provide a little context for the event happening here today, we have to take a look at the events prior to this day. And I have to come with like the big things here. Every 500 years, you could say the German and Slavic people, they have a pulse. They do things to clear up the mess in Europe. So this event is in the middle of two of such events. In 1534, let's say 1500, they create the Protestantism, where they want to clear out the papal control of the church and go back to the more free, liberal, or pluralistic way of doing church services and your relation to God, which is more a more Celtic way, you could say. And the next time the Germans comes out with a new concept is 1940, where they tell us that nationalism combined with socialism is a great idea, which is a very successful idea. Today we have socialism and nationalism instead of. But at that time, nationalism, socialism was better. So they propagate this idea all over Europe, and think this is a better way to govern ourselves. And in the middle of this, we have 1679. You could say it's about the middle of that, more or less. And here we see the flaws of what they have done in 1500s. One of the flaws is that they treat the Scandinavian countries as an area of influence, which means that the German families, the clever, well-educated, well-connected German families, runs the country and suppress taxes on the population. And we see the consequences of this up here in Thy and Mors, where they have come up with a new concept in 1680 about. So 20 years prior to this, where there's a fixed taxation fee for every piece of land, meaning if you want to not pay too much tax, you could limit the amount of land you have and increase the productivity on this land, because the taxation is free. It's the same Either you fail with your crops or you have successful massive amount of crop. So it's better for you to limit your amount of land and have successful amount of harvest rather than the opposite. And we see the consequences of this here, not in the way of all talking about the desert lands, because a massive amount of land is desert at this time because people leave it. They only take the land which has too low fixed taxation, which has a prospect of prosperity and surplus harvest. Also, what they do is they stop paying the taxes that the amount are too big. So the consequences of this are secret. You will not see any writing about this. What you do is you basically never pay. You never pay your tax. And when the crown comes out to collect the tax, you either disappear or you leave the land or you move to your extended family and you together join a farm and split it into, and this way protect yourself against the enormous amount of taxation. And how did this develop to this point? So we got to look back to around 1531, 34, 36, and look at the events there. And an important player in those events were local. His name was Skipper Clemens. And from the Aalborg port, he was leading an uproar against the Protestant choice. That means the Rantzau family of northern Germany, their favorite. Rantzau came into the game later, but he was supporting the Catholic king and generally creating a sort of revolt. You call it like farmers' revolt or something like that, to overthrow that attempt, and successfully pushed the king's forces out of Jutland, but later failed an attack around Viborg and lost his life under the most cruel circumstances. The effect of this was that Denmark became Protestant, and for supporting the Catholic king, you could say the heir apparent, more or less. The consequence of this was that all who had supported this king lost their land, as they owned about 50% of the land here in Jutland, and it was the northwestern part of Jutland who lost their lands. Then they lost all of their lands, which was 50% of the land. The remaining part was abbey land, most of it. A few years later, around 1537, the king got a new idea to confiscate the church land too. And to our in our mind up here in northern Jutland, the church, the abbey's lands were our land because we gave it to the church to run our state. So the church or the abbeys were running the education system, elderly care, hospitals, sick, all of that. A lot of the administration was run by the church. So you would give land to the church to provide services for you. And this is how the church had about half of the land. Of course, the church doesn't know really how to run the land because it's none of their business. So eventually, they had professional people running it. These families took advantage of this, and so on and so forth. So a massive story about this. But to understand 1679, all we need to know was our private land and property and our common land and property was confiscated by the crown. And some well over 100 years later, the crown was poor again, because taking everybody's land and everybody's property does not make you rich. Obviously, it makes you poor. And then you have to provide a new taxation system to take what you think the farmers have buried under the floors in the kitchen and take these money as well. So they go around 1660s, 16 around there. You could come up with a bunch of dates. They come with this aforementioned fixed taxation system. And the answer to this up here in Thy and Mors is not to pay the taxes and to gather in, in good farms, run them well, and leave the too hard taxed property for desert. And this is why we are here today. So, what is secret about this? The secrecy comes in as the estate owners. There's new estate owners here because the crown owed money, so they gave this land. They have confiscated to capable people from the rest of the country. Most of these Anglo-Saxon families, which means, or maybe rather Preußen families, like northern Germany or from the south part of what we call Eastern Lake and the Baltic Sea. And these families are very capable in business and educated and so on and so forth. They come up here, they get these big estates, and they own this land. And our people here now are servants. They are tenancy farmers on their own land, which was confiscated, as I mentioned. So in their mind, these people are foreigners coming in. They are the king's men, and they just want to take the money and run out of the country. So this gotta be stopped. And they found a system. The system is not to pay tax. When the estate owners come out to collect the tax, they just leave the property, move to other families, take all the valuables away in a warning system. And why we don't know about this too much is because, of course, it has to be run completely silent. No one looks into this, and no one gets hurt. So why do we have a case here, 1679, we can look into? That is, in the strange cases, a piece of property is partially owned by Crown and partially owned by someone else who it seems to owe taxes to the Crown. So the Crown is involved in this case. So the private estate owners is not in this case. They are used to this and know about this, and they just have to be victims of this, and they're not able to collect their money and collect the tax for the Crown. But in this case, the Crown pursues a case, hires someone about 25 kilometers away to run it, and then sue the entire family for taking away all the valuables of this property, and they try to recollect this property and get it into taxation. So what we get a chance to here is to see how the system works. We of course don't know if this is a common case, the way this has been run, or there's something special about this. But having read about 50% of all the cases in Mors and Thy from the period of 1600 to around 1760 or 70, something like this. I have to say that this case looks like it could be a model for many cases. So I'm very excited to present this case to you and look into the secrecy of how the assets are moving around and floating while the Crown is running to collect their taxes. So the storyline is simple. Ivar Madsen has died. The Crown has been out in his estate to evaluate his property, his leftover property, his probate. He's survived by his wife Maren, Nils' daughter, and Maren Nils' daughter has a brother who lives in Getterup, in a part of Getterup called Gundtoft, in a farm called St Gertrud, meaning the path of stones farm kind of thing. And this man, later, he will be sued for emptying the farm on her behalf. So basically, the Crown enters the farm soon after Ivar Madsen's death, and check the property for valuables and so on, and then find it emptied. And somehow they are told by someone that all the valuables are at the family and friends places, so they can't tax it. This way, avoiding the huge tax burden laid on Mads Nielsen, and she has been the director of this effort, where Mads Nielsen has been doing the work, and therefore he's the one being sued. So we follow this story already from the outset, is that Ivar Madsen, he dies. So Ivar Madsen, he died in 1678, and this is where we meet this story the first time. Everything seems normal. It's around summer of 1678. Ivar Madsen has died. Crown goes out to check the property. They have an attorney up from Syd-Thy, which is the main city by far of Thy. No city is anywhere near the size of this one. And this is the center of the Crown taxation of all of Thy. So they sent, the attorney is Peter Christensen. He comes from Thyholm, which is a small island close by. And it is the Crown's leader up there in Thisted, who is the leader there, Jens Hansen. And everything looks normal. They review the house, the state of the house. They find there needs to be done some improvements to the barn and the house and everything, to make sure it is leasable for the next tenant. So it's just upgrades and they fix things, rotten wood and so on and so forth, the roof and all this. And this comes to a modest amount of about 30 rigsdaler. A rigsdaler, for your information, is about $1. So if you say daler in a different way, it becomes to dollar. And one daler is about the value of a small horse, a young lamb, or maybe probably about half of a sack of grain or something like this. So 20 rigsdaler is a manageable amount of $20 is a manageable amount of money to owe to a crown for this, and everything seems normal. Then pass some time, and obviously the crown has got some information about something is wrong there. So they sent a new attorney down there almost a year later and start to build up a case. They have somehow, and we don't know how, heard about there is an issue here. And the farm in question where Ivar Madsen lived is called Søndergård, meaning South Farm, which is the most southern farm in the neighboring parish of the one we are studying today, which is Getterup. So the neighboring south one is Hellisø, and in the southern part of Hellisø we have Søndergård. And this is where Ivar Madsen died last year, and his wife is left with this farm. And somehow it seems that she has left the farm. She's not trying to remarry and run the farm again. So something is wrong. And so the first part of the case, they just confirm that Maren Nisdatter has left the farm, and where she is now, it seems to be at her brother's house farm up in Stensgard. So the way Crown is approaching this case is they are trying to get all people involved in transportation of the goods from Søndergaard, most of the goods to Stensgaard, or otherwise try to trace where all the valuable went. What we have to imagine is a large amount of the valuables are in dollars, and they can't trace those ones. So what they can trace is horses, big items. So they find, for instance, they talk to, let's see, Niels Pedersen in Gundtoft, who also lives in the same farm in around Stensgaard in another farm called Refshove. He tells Crown that he was lent the wagon to drive from Søndergaard in Hellesø, pick up some stuff, and in between there was some grains in some sacks. And he took those to Stensgaard as another person has delivered it to him, but he didn't know what kind of grain was in these sacks, because grain price varies highly due to the quality of and kind of the grain there. I forgot to mention all this is happening on the court day, May 10th of 1679, meaning almost a year after Ivar Madsen he died. So what we are looking at is a case which is so old, and it's so hard to prove where these horses and grain and all this went. Did they go back? What happened to them? Are they alive? Where are things? So I have to guess that the court and everybody around this family has been trying to kind of delay this effort of the Crown to figure out what happened. So all the information we have is from this date. They are in the court documents registering the old documents from a year before, but they were not part of the court documents. They were in other files. And in this case, they have been lifted up and put in the main court file and read to the court and being filed to the court for this case, the purpose of this case. And we have multiple witnesses talking about what they were ordered to do. So basically, most of the witnesses can be honest about what happened. They don't have to lie. They just have to say what they did. What they did was they took 2 horses and carried them to Stensgaard. And what else happened, they don't know. And so on and so forth. Everybody will pitch in with their little story, as someone has been telling someone that they were part of this effort to empty Søndergaard for valuables. And the case is then stopped on May 10th after all this information has been provided. Then the week after, the Crown is again trying to push the case forward, but not much is happening. So the case is delayed some 4 weeks. And then a new attempt is made to clarify the case. Some of the court documents are repeat of the previous, and they are just repeated and written again. No new things has happened. The case is then delayed again another month or so to June the 21st of 1679. And again, the Crown with their attorney from Herringgaard in the Central Thy is trying to pursue this case and repeating the exact same information and so on and so forth. We do not find a verdict in this case, and so I have to speculate what happened. It's possible it has been moved to another court, a higher court. I find it unlikely, because Mads Nielsen, who has been sued here, he continue his position in society, and the way we can see this is before these cases started and he was sued for emptying the estate, which is a serious crime. He was a high status member of society. He was tinghører multiple years before. Even he was sued for having a child outside his marriage. He didn't lose his status at that time. He was suing other people for owing him money and so on and so forth. He grew a normal high status in society for being tinghører and a serious member of society. Was valuable member of the court for years on end. I think around almost 20 years he was valuable before this case, and he continued undisturbed after. So looking from that perspective, I can guarantee he was not in jail for any length of time, and for sure not even a year, because he continues after in the court as a court member. So we can say that as a matter of fact. And he had important roles and responsibilities after this for several years after. So we have to assume and speculate why this case has been more or less dropped, or at least almost disappeared. The Crown came with an astonishing amount of taxation owed, around 150 rigsdaler or dollars, and some other amounts for fixing the property up was around, as far as I remember, around 30 rigsdaler. And then there has been missing these horses and so on and so forth. They would be a total, these horses and all this would be a total of about 10 rigsdaler. So even the Crown would manage to get all the money and all the horses and grain and everything from Mads Nielsen. That would be minuscule. It would be 10, 20 rigsdaler. And the amount owed was 200. And these attorneys, they cost easily a rigsdaler every time they show up. So the Crown will bury themselves in cost to run after this money for the horses and grain missing. And you could not even be sure where this grain and horses were a year later. So I think basically this case was drowned. And what we can see from some courts cases, in particular in Thy, which I finished studying, that the practice of emptying the estates continued for 50 years after this, 50, 70 years after this. And in some cases, you would have an astonishing amount of cash moving around prior or just around the death of a wealthy person or semi-wealthy person. So what we are looking at is a concerted effort of ensuring the assets can move in the family. In this case, these typically are what we will call male or father's assets, because there's no mentioning of female property, which is typically silver, gold, clothing, chest full of valuables and that sort of thing. The horses and calves and grain, and this is considered typically to be the male ownership and father's ownership. And this case is all about father's ownership. And we know from other cases, again, that female property can be almost as valuable as male property. So this is completely left out of this case. So we can see there is a flow of property and valuables completely under the radar, except for this case, but the case is dropped. So yes, the valuables are moving around, and the Crown was not able to put their hands on it. It's astonishing. It's hard for me to tell you in one sentence what we can learn from this story, as it's only snippets of the real life up in Syd-Thy. We can see of this court documents and the church records and so on and so forth. And we can gather from people's family allures and so on and so forth. But it's apparent to me, reading through all these documents, that there is a life here outside the court, under the radar. And for me, this particular court case demonstrates a solid life of wealth under the radar for lots of families, helping one another, trying to asset protect, try to keep the knowledge and the valuables running through the veins of the family, not to try to disturb the crown or throw them off or take revenge, just to make sure we survive. So yes, not to take from that point, there are poor people in Thy at this time. They don't own much. They live a life in blowing air, sunshine, rain. In nature, they eat fresh fish. Sometimes they have grain, sometimes not. But a large portion of the families has middle-sized farms, and they have wealth. They have a horse, they have multiple horses, they have wagons, they have multiple wagons. They have servants, multiple servants. They have dollars, many dollars. But what they do is they have to keep it out of sight. Because in a country like Denmark, the crown has spies everywhere, or the state has spies everywhere, and they just want to increase their taxation revenue and come up with new taxes, and they will just run with the money. So you keep low profile, you keep going, and you don't talk about it.